everyone. Sorry for our late start here. A few technical difficulties, but we made it. I'm excited to be revisiting something we haven't done in quite some time since we started Exploration Tech, which is just a one-on-one session with Lori and I discussing platforms. Actually, we never had the conversation around platforms, but prior to our guest appearances, Lori and I were doing Exploration Tech series one-on-one. So looking forward to doing this with you today, Lori. As always, my name is Jared Heckler. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Brilliance. I've been here for coming up on 5 years, and I can't believe it's already been 5 years. So looking forward to the conversation today. Lori, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. It is exciting to have an opportunity to have this discussion today. A little bit about myself and Brilliance. I started Brilliance a little more than 20 years ago. I went to Purdue in computer electrical engineering, and through an internship, I ended up at NASA Johnson Space Center, where I eventually worked as a flight controller for the space shuttle program. I ended up meeting my husband at NASA. He also was in engineering at Purdue. He eventually went to work for Rockwell Automation, and we ended up relocating to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was trying to figure out what could be as cool as space. So I decided to start a web development company. That was in 1998, and the web was kind of in its infancy. My husband managed the largest data warehouse at Rockwell, their point of sale database that worked with their Rockwell distributors. And as a part of his experience there and my experience in starting this company, we found that we were kind of uniquely equipped as an organization to create digital commerce sites for manufacturers and distributors, really understanding the B2B needs. So 9 years ago, my husband left his job at Rockwell, and now he leads our development team. And we've grown over the years. We're now a team of 18. We made the Inc. 5000 list this year, which is really exciting. And over the way, we've gained a lot of experience that we can share. We're excited to share with you today about B2B e-commerce and software platforms. Really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today.
All right, so let's jump into it, Lori.
Yeah, well, actually, I want to start first, Jared, with a question for you. So you've been at Brilliance 5 years. Why do you think education around what e-commerce platform you choose is important?
It's a really great question, and I could take it in various ways, but I'm going to go probably the route that our friends at Gartner would say don't do, and I'm going to go the scary route. So I'm going to say, unfortunately, there are many times where I have seen organizations come to us and say, we made a decision on X platform, and here are our pain points. And when you take steps back from where they were, clearly the decision process and what they did, they didn't incorporate a lot of education around making this decision. They probably saw one or two really good looking demos and were like, oh, that works. And then the price was, right on point with what we wanted to see, and we could get it launched in the time that we were looking to do it. It's so much more than that, because if you don't go through the appropriate steps and take time to educate yourself on this vastly changing landscape that we're all in, you will find yourself in a situation where you're going to have to replatform way too soon, something that you should not have to do after making that investment 2 years ago, let's just say. So for me, I've seen organizations, unfortunately, pick a platform just based on a couple quick things and not really taking the time to dive further into their requirements. And then you end up with a platform that you're boxed into, you spent the time and money to invest in it, and you got to make it work. Usually leadership at that point then is like, all right, you got to make it work for at least X amount of time.
Right.
So that's where I would take that.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point. The reality is that e-commerce is challenging to buy for organizations. It's not like buying a refrigerator. Well, maybe buying a refrigerator isn't easy, but it's not like buying something that we can just easily shop for and compare prices on and understand exactly what we're getting. So yeah, education has been a big part of for us and for our clients, I think.
Yeah, and I'd say if you're one of our audience members and you're thinking through, all right, that sounds great in theory, but how do I take those steps? We have some free resources that we'd be happy to share with you that list out. It's called a customer questionnaire. It's one of the sources we have that would allow you to dive further into your requirements, ask questions that will force you then to look at platforms harder. Lori, while we not be platform agnostic. We will provide recommendations to prospects that might result in them not working with us. And if you're sitting here, I'm sure you're listening to this conversation going, okay, come on, Brilliance, that's a bunch of smoke. But it's the truth. Lori, what would you say to those audience members?
Well, first, I understand your skepticism, and I think it's good to be a little bit skeptical. I think the reality is I think that most people in the industry have some bias. And so I think it's really good that you understand, like, what is the bias of the person that you're speaking to? The exception to that is probably like analysts like Gartner or Forrester, but obviously you've got to pay money to get their advice for you. So just be very aware of the people that you're working with, like what relationships they may have that may bias the information that they're giving you. Regarding Brilliance and the advice that we share, we're really about long-term relationships with clients. We've been in this business for 20 years. I'm really a believer that we build trust with people by telling the truth. Jared, we've had instances where we've had conversations with people that they don't end up working with us, and then, we'll get a call from them a year later, right? And I think, those are the types of things that really make things work in the long run. And so why it's in our best interest to really work to give the best information we can. And also, I think there are pros and cons to different platforms. Different platforms can be the right fit for the different use cases. And so it's good to be able to speak honestly about where all of those platforms are at. Jared, how is it that we could even speak to platforms that we don't actually work with? How are we able to do that?
Yeah. So as Lori mentioned at the beginning, we've been in business for 20 plus years. Lori, one of the values that she's instituted at Brilliance is this idea of continuous education. And you can see that value spread across all the employees here at Brilliance. Everyone loves that idea of continuous education. And I think that comes into this question, as Lori, who acts as our sales engineer today, hopefully she'll be out of that soon, as we're looking at a solution for a potential client, and they may reference something that we don't work with, or we may have heard or found a solution that is something that fits their needs, we will do that research and look further into it and have some calls and dive into some use cases to understand if it's a fit for this particular case. Even in the 5 years I've been here, so much knowledge has come from those conversations and especially with the way e-commerce is moving and all the tools and digital solutions around it, it's hard to not continue to keep an eye on what's happening in the market. So I think that education is something that we're always doing, and speaks to that ability to speak to platforms that we're not partnered with. I'd also throw out there that we are a Gartner client. For those who aren't familiar with Gartner, they're a research firm specifically in the technology space. They have hundreds, probably thousands of analysts. Lori, you probably know that better than I do.
Not certain, but a lot.
A lot of analysts, which, through our partnership with them, our relationship with them, we get to set up calls with their analysts and have conversations on a variety of topics. And one of the topics that we frequently are having is usually in relation to their Magic Quadrants, which rates different platforms depending on the specific instance. It could be e-commerce, it could be CMS, it could be digital experience, and we'll have conversations about industry leaders and things that we should be looking into. So I think that also plays into our education as well around platforms that we might not partner with.
Definitely.
Lori, can you give us an overview now? Let's jump into what you probably all waiting to see here, an overview of the pros and cons of the different software platforms that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to step through 4 different software platforms as a part of this discussion today. And so we are going to talk about Episerver. We'll talk about Episerver B2B Commerce Cloud by Insight, which is actually a separate product. Episerver acquired a company called Insight last December. We'll talk about BigCommerce and Magento. Now, clearly there are more platforms than that out on the market, but these are 4 platforms that we see as being very specific to this industry and space that we're in, especially in terms of B2B e-commerce. And I think they're a really good, at least starting point for our discussion around B2B e-commerce, and we'll kind of step through the pros and cons of each. So first, I'm going to talk about Episerver, and here I'm not talking about the B2B Commerce Cloud by Insight, but the content management system and e-commerce framework that is the Episerver product that has existed for many years. Episerver is headquartered in Sweden. They came to the United States more than 10 years ago, and really is a strong platform as really a scalable and very extendable platform with minimal upgrade costs, so a low total cost of ownership. And they've made a lot of really smart investments in terms of personalization, artificial intelligence. One of the reasons that I am a real fan of Episerver is the fact that they have a framework that has a unified platform for content and e-commerce, and most platforms you'll find are either strong at e-commerce or strong at content, but Episerver is strong at both. And it really provides platform agility. And also, I just mentioned here that in the last year, Episerver's made some really interesting acquisitions. Ideo does content recommendations, Optimizely does A/B testing, and really is about optimization testing practices that you can use throughout the development cycle. So Episerver is definitely a market leader and doing a lot of smart things to support businesses and their growth. On the downside, Episerver has high initial labor costs in terms of setup. It requires developer support either for an outside firm, or you want to train your internal team to get up to speed on how to work with Episerver. And there aren't as many pre-built add-ons in their marketplace as exist with other options. Stepping into the next platform that we'll look at, so Episerver last year acquired a product called Insight, which has a lower cost of entry with really more capability for B2B use cases. So like think of this in terms of like you have a site that is configurable versus having development done to get it set up and started. And again, it has, like the core Episerver product, it has a low total cost of ownership. So upgrades are fast and inexpensive. It also has a strong data integration framework. It also has features like a mobile app and a PIM. So some really strong functionality available for people, and really pre-built request for quote, multiple roles for buyers. So they've thought through a lot of this B2B functionality because they specifically target on B2B e-commerce. That's their focus. On the downside, Episerver's B2B Commerce Cloud by Insight has less content capabilities and really less agility for other use cases. So if you start thinking about, I want to create a vendor portal, or I want to create these other web applications that may not look specifically like an e-commerce flow, like while actually from a content perspective, you can do a fair amount of things with Insight, but not as much as you could with the core Episerver product. And you just have less agility to create other types of web applications on the same framework. So going to Magento, so a lot of you are probably familiar with, they have a very large market share. And along those lines, from an upside, they have a large community of support, developers. There are a lot of people that work with it. It has strong e-commerce functionality. It's been around a while. They have an extensive marketplace with different extensions to add functionality. And, the code base is completely customizable. You can really do whatever you want with it, which can be a plus. On the downside, it has a lack of content management ability. So like it really isn't, it's not a CMS, it's an e-commerce platform. There's a lack of workflow capabilities. I think the biggest downside from my perspective with Magento is really the fact that maintaining customizations that you make on the platform is expensive. So, and don't take my word for this, ask Magento store owners that like what version they're on and why they're not on the latest version. Because in general, you will find that people are not on the latest version because it costs a lot of money to stay on the latest version. So, and you've got hosting and maintenance headaches there. And the other piece of this is if you're not on the latest version, there's security vulnerabilities. And there have been some recent news stories of different like hacks and that the customers that were hacked were on older versions. But part of the reason they're on older versions is because it's really expensive to stay up to date. So that's the downside. BigCommerce is the last platform that we'll talk about here. So BigCommerce is a multi-tenant SaaS. So there are no upgrades to be concerned about PCI compliance, hosting, all of that is taken care of. They really have a quick time to value. So, you can get a site up and running fast. And it's good value for the functionality. There's a lot of pre-built tools. There's a large marketplace of add-ons. So there's a lot there. And really they've done a lot of work specifically from a B2B perspective on investing in B2B features and add-ons in their marketplace that will support the B2B space. On the downside, while there's really not technical debt in the product itself, you need to think about if your goals are larger than what BigCommerce can offer in their product. If you have to add another, site for an invoice portal, there's a technical debt in those additional applications. You need to think about the different apps that you're using. How do they work with each other? How do they share data with each other? It really is built for commerce, not content. They have some features for content capabilities that can be usable, but it really depends on your goals. And also, if global, if multilingual, multi-site, if that's important to you, their functionality there is not as strong. So that's it. Those are the platforms that we're kind of talking about today. I know I just ran through a ton of information there, and there's a lot more we can talk about, but kind of a high-level overview.
That's great. Yes, that was a lot of great information, and I'm looking forward to diving into it further here. So let's start with something that we hear way too often. Lori, if someone came to you and said, I needed to launch an e-commerce solution and I need it yesterday, who would you recommend? What would you say to that person and why?
Yeah. Well, first, what does quickly mean? So yesterday, all right. So really fast, right? I'm assuming this person probably doesn't have an existing e-commerce site, and my first thought would be to look at BigCommerce. If they do have an existing e-commerce site, I want to learn more. I think the answer still could be BigCommerce definitely is a fast option. You also want to think through what is your long-term strategy? So what's the other functionality that you want to offer? And depending on the answers, there may be other things that are better to look at. Whenever you're replacing something that already exists, there are a lot of things that you have to take into account as a part of that process. So, but on the whole, BigCommerce is definitely the fastest of the platforms that we talked through. There are some platforms that we didn't talk about. And Jared, I'm guessing that some viewers might be wondering why we aren't talking about WordPress, WooCommerce, or Shopify. And what would you tell them?
I'm going to start with Shopify. So I'm guessing most of the audience is probably educated enough around this to understand that BigCommerce and Shopify compete head to head quite directly. BigCommerce, I think, is probably Shopify's biggest competitor and vice versa. There was a period of time for Brilliance where we had reviewed Shopify and ended up deciding that that wasn't a fit for us. Specifically, it came back to this idea of our use cases, our customer base is, in the B2B space, in the manufacturing and distribution space, are looking for typically a more complexity associated with them. Security is an issue, and focusing on those 2 points, Shopify didn't fit the bill for us, and BigCommerce did. And tying in again that manufacturing distribution B2B side of things. So that's what led us to BigCommerce and not Shopify. As far as WordPress and WooCommerce, I think you could say the same thing around the complexity security. I'd also say that for Brilliance, Lori had mentioned earlier, we're really about long-term relationships. And when you look at a WordPress WooCommerce solution, more often than not, I think that says there's someone who's looking to stand up a site and kind of run with it on their own and walk out the door from their implementer. And that's just not a fit for us. We want people that are looking to think long-term, think strategy, look to us for assistance and help and how they can continue to grow their digital presence. Did you add anything to that, Lori?
Yeah, well, the other thing I would say, so when it comes to WordPress and WooCommerce, obviously WordPress is a very common platform, has a lot of market share, so a lot of people are familiar with it. But when it comes to B2B e-commerce specifically, there's a lot of work you have to do. You can pull it off, but it requires a developer who really knows what they're doing and can create a lot of maintenance headaches, like back to total cost of ownership. I often think about, you don't want to be spending a bunch of time trying to manage different extensions or apps that you have installed and making sure they work together well, like figuring out how they need to be upgraded. You want to spend your time on like developing new and better features, functionality for your end users versus being caught up in maintenance headaches. And so I just think, Brilliance focuses, like our target market is manufacturers, distributors, 20 to 500 million. And in our work in that space, like WordPress and WooCommerce and Shopify, I don't think are really the right products for customers with those needs. Along those lines, Jared, we recently had a conversation with a distributor in the B2B space who was reviewing Shopify and BigCommerce, and one of the problems they were trying to solve was related to the complexity of their catalog. So why is BigCommerce a better fit to solve that?
Yeah, it was validating to hear. It's always great to share real life examples, in my opinion, and validating for us to hear, this situation specifically. So the client or the prospect we've been working with ran into this issue around complexity, and they were pretty far into a review of Shopify, and then uncovered that Shopify was unable to support more than 100 variants as far as their catalog goes. And when they look at BigCommerce was set up to support 600 variants. And that's a drastic difference. We're talking, a difference of 500 variants. That can be a huge deal, and I think pretty common for most of our manufacturers and distributor clients.
Yeah.
In addition to that, they also had to compare the option values, and so BigCommerce couldn't support 250 option values, whereas Shopify could only support 3. Again, in the manufacturing distribution space, those numbers really speak to how BigCommerce is set up to support B2B better than Shopify is.
Yep. Yes, definitely. Because there is a lot of complexity in terms of the products in the B2B space for sure.
We've talked about, how we're not platform agnostic. What does Brilliance's process look like for selecting new platforms?
Yeah, well, the reality is, in the beginning, we were building sites custom, which I wouldn't recommend because there weren't really software platforms on the market. But this space is changing constantly. There's always new platforms out there, and it's part of our job to be looking for what the best solution is for our customers. And so we really take kind of an ongoing process of evaluating what's out on the market, and for the customers we work with, what's really what are platforms that are going to best help solve their needs? And so we do frequently go and take calls with different software platforms, taking a look at, is this a better fit than the platforms we're recommending today, or how might this serve our customer base? So we both go through demos and we'll look at different products. We also, you mentioned Jared Gartner, they're a big part of how we do that is by reviewing what analysts are saying. I would say, my take is that it's not, we have chosen to not necessarily partner with organizations that may be the most well-known, which maybe in some cases works against us. But from my standpoint, it's more important to be looking at a platform that has the largest market share, to find platforms that best serve our customers' needs. And like us, are really committed to long-term partnership with clients, because that's something that we want a vendor that is going to be a part of that they're a part of that solution.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's, in my experience, this is something that's pretty unique about our organization. We will, as saying earlier, we will recommend a platform that we don't work with if it is the best fit. And again, it comes back to this idea of education and understanding various platforms and taking different routes of finding solutions that best fit our clients.
Yeah.
We talked about WordPress, we talked about Shopify and why they weren't on the list, but there's some pretty significant enterprise type solutions out there that we also haven't referenced. So let's take it the opposite direction. Can you speak about SAP Hybris? They're known as a leader in the B2B e-commerce space.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, they are a leader in the B2B e-commerce space and have a lot of, really impressive functionality. I would come back to the fact that, so at Brilliance, our focus is manufacturers and distributors, 20 to 500 million in revenue. And, Hybris is a great solution, but also really expensive and complex to maintain. So we really want to be thinking about, like, what's the right fit for the organizations that we're talking to, and in order to make the best recommendations to them.
As I mentioned earlier, I personally love sharing real life stories because I think it allows the audience to connect better because it's coming from a perspective, hopefully, that they can relate to. So a few months ago, we were supporting a platform review for an organization. They were reviewing both Episerver and Magento. Obviously, we're Episerver partners, but during that review, their internal team was split down the middle. Marketing was leading Magento, and IT was leading Episerver. This is definitely not the first time we've encountered this situation. I probably could go down the well and find 10 other situations where we've seen something similar. But can you speak to the most common reasons IT and marketing split on platforms?
Yeah, well, it is interesting. So I think it comes back to the fact that, marketing and IT have different things that they're really focused and looking for. Buying teams are the reality of where we're at today in terms of digital commerce. So marketing and IT should be, hopefully, in a healthy organization, should be collaborating as a part of this decision. And really, IT is coming from a background of support. So we need to think about where people are at. They're thinking about how they support and maintain this. They're more focused on details. They're thinking about how expensive, how much time that upgrade's going to take, how much work it's going to take to get their team on, set up to support it, to develop on it. The IT team is thinking about, when marketing asks me to go do this thing, how hard is it going to be for me to pull it off, right? Marketing's thinking about creative ideas and vision and leads. And they also probably are looking at who else they know, because marketing's probably had some experiences in the past that have not gone well. They have IT is they felt like their hands were tied. They weren't able to do what they wanted. And so it often can be important to marketing to see other people that have other marketers that have worked with a specific platform. So market share can be an important aspect for them. Really, at the end of the day, it's really important for IT and marketing to have, respect for each other in the process, to listen to each other, to hear each other's hopes and fears, and to have some healthy conflict in that situation. What's really interesting is that, Episerver actually is a super strong platform for marketers. And for IT, which is one of the reasons that I really like it. But someone's views of a platform may not be based on understanding the platform a lot itself. It may be based more on what you've heard from some other people that you're connected with, or wanting to work with a platform that maybe your partner knows well, or other companies have worked with. Jared, can you speak to what you often see in the buying process and where it can go wrong? Where can it go wrong when you're picking a platform and vendor? And on the flip side, what's a better approach?
Yeah, so we touched on education now. At the very beginning, I think I referenced the organization who selected a platform and realized, getting into it now, that it's not a fit for them any longer. And it really came back to the idea of not diving into their requirements as closely as they should have. So I think you can tie that back into this. And what we see as an organization is, well, I'll start with the positive. We have a customer who was actually on another session of Exploration Tech talking about his experience and what he did in terms of how he started his review for a new e-commerce solution. And it was really well done. He had brought in numerous parties from various departments within the organization, had them sit down and go through lists of questions that they had then asked, that pain points that they're experiencing currently with their process, what they can do better, kind of a wish list ultimately, and then had a really solid foundation of understanding across the organization, as well as a set of requirements that they needed out the gate. If you're inexperienced, I would highly recommend you lean on, either the platform or a partner that works for the platform to help you build out some requirements. You will do yourself no good if you have very light requirements, even in a discovery process, because ultimately you will get through a review and find that you've uncovered something that you didn't think about, and it's going to delay your whole process. So spend the time, get your requirements on paper, include various department heads, get their buy-in and their feedback. There are organizations out there like Fit for Commerce and other consultants that can help you doing these exercises. They will cost you extra to support that, but it might be worth it depending on the size organization you are. At a minimum, involve people, make sure you set time aside to complete that exercise before you dive into a review. Laura, you have any thoughts on that? I know you're very involved in that process.
The only thing I would add is that as you're getting input from different people on the team, it's like sometimes one of the things that can go wrong is that as you get input from lots of people, which is super positive, you have this huge list of like all these things that you want.
Yeah.
And so being able to kind of approach it from a mindset of like, here are all the things we want, but maybe we don't need all these things immediately. The other problem that you can get into is that if you give everything you want to software vendors or to an agency, potentially, depending on the agency, they may come back and give you a quote for how they're going to accomplish all of it out of the gate. But what really, in my opinion, is a better approach is to have a conversation about like what your goals are, to talk about what's the smallest like portion of your big picture goal that you could start with, and then kind of incrementally building on that over time, because it allows you to see value sooner. And if you work with a partner that can be collaborative with you, we often talk with people about which of the things you want are going to be the easiest and cheapest to do first, and what things make sense to do later. So working with a partner to prioritize those things, I think, is good.
I completely agree. I think the wish list and having the must-haves, future items, and depending on cost type bucket lists is certainly the way to approach the project. So we've talked on a variety of platforms now. We didn't really hit on licensing costs, but clearly there's differences. So we quickly touch on what features lead to the pricing gap between an Episerver solution and BigCommerce, and same goes with how about Magento and BigCommerce?
I'm not sure actually that I talked about the fact that with Episerver's products, their hosting is included. It's hosted in the cloud, and also included as a part of that is enterprise search capabilities. And you also have access to multiple environments. So there's a lot of capabilities there from an enterprise level that you have that are different from what you would have like in BigCommerce. You don't have a staging site. BigCommerce has a nice search, but it's not of the same power as the enterprise search that is available in Episerver. And also we talked about the fact that Episerver has really a content management tool and has workflow around that. So really in some cases, like they're different products for different kinds of needs. When you look at Magento and BigCommerce, BigCommerce is in the cloud, it's multi-tenant SaaS, it's always up to date. So to me, like again, the licensing is different in some sense because of that. There's more that we can talk about there for sure. I would also note that for Magento, like in many cases, you'll end up getting additional extensions for search to support versus what's there.
If you were to create a list of features important to the manufacturers and distributors, what would they be? And part two is which platforms that we have discussed today support these out of the box?
In B2B, complex pricing, so contract pricing, like having customers see their own price is something that is a requirement. Requests for quote features are something that are often a part of the B2B sale. Enterprise search, we talked about the importance of that. One of the features that I think, in my experience, isn't there for many platforms and really can be a real differentiator for B2B is multiple buyers per account when you have multiple people logging in within a single account structure. and potentially different buyer roles and even workflow around that. And the platforms that we talked about, Episerver, Epi B2B Commerce Cloud by Insight, BigCommerce, and Magento, like all have that like multiple buyer per account functionality. Magento actually doesn't have as strong of workflow capabilities. With BigCommerce, you need to use some add-ons to get there, some apps to get there, but like all of them, you can get there. And that's a really important thing to look at, because often for B2B, it's going to be something that if you're not doing now, you'll need to do someday. Multi-language, multi-site. Depending on if you're global, a lot of organizations are going global in terms of or are global already. Then to me, like Episerver is really the path to go, because they have much stronger features there. Yeah, so I don't know. I didn't quite cover them all very extremely specifically, but if you have, we love to have these conversations with people, is what I would say. And like the specifics like can be nuanced in terms of like, with all of these platforms, there are ways to achieve these things. The question is like, how much work are you going to have to do, and how much money is it going to cost you now versus and in the future to maintain it? And you really want to think about like how you're spending the majority of your money on innovation of new features for your customers and users versus spending money keeping your platform up and running and maintaining the stuff that you built a year ago or 3 years ago.
Well, we covered quite a bit here today. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us, and thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you all soon.